It is spring of the year 1940. German armor and mechanized forces stream into Belgium, and the Allies desperately rush to head them off. In the previously quiet Belgian countryside, thousands of men and hundreds of vehicles clashed, in what would be the first great tank battle of World War II. The period after Germany invaded and occupied Poland during the fall of 1939, in conjunction with the Soviet Union, is often known as the Phoney War. These next 10 months were relatively quiet, as German and French soldiers watched each other from their respective fortifications, but there were no large-scale engagements. Victory in Poland had been over a much weaker opponent, with a fraction of the industrial capability of Germany, which was effectively sucker punched by the Soviet Union from the east, and even so, it did not go completely seamlessly. Confronting the might of France and Britain would be a true test of Germany's rebuilt military strength. At first, the German plan for campaigning the West, known as Fall Gelb or Case Yellow, was essentially a modified, less ambitious version of the World War I Schieffelin plan, striking through the Netherlands and Belgium into northern France in order to gain ground that could serve as a base for further offensive operations. It was a relatively uncreative plan, as it essentially called for a frontal assault, and was unlikely to lead to any rapid or decisive result. However, something completely unexpected happened. In a freak accident, now known as the Mechlin incident, a plane carrying a German officer crashed in Belgium with copies of the plan, and even though the officer did his best to destroy these copies, it was thought to be compromised. Though there certainly were other factors in addition to this, Fall Gelb was postponed, and eventually heavily revised. Developed by General Erich von Manstein, this new Fall Gelb called for a diversionary thrust through Belgium and the Netherlands by Army Group B, which would draw the Allies in and pin them in place. Meanwhile, the main attack, conducted by Army Group A, would push through the south in the hilly and forested Ardennes region. Achieving operational surprise, it would smash through French resistance before a serious response could be launched, then drive to the Channel coast and surround the best British and French armies in a crushing pincer. Using the analogy of a bullfighter, Army Group B, attacking through Belgium and the Netherlands, served as the Matador's cloak, getting the Allies' attention and drawing them in. Army Group A served as the Matador's sword, delivering an unexpected, killing blow against a distracted opponent. However, this ambitious plan was not without risk, since German motorized units moving through the hills and forests could easily become bogged down or stalled, and if the Allies responded in time, the flanking Germans could themselves become cut off and encircled. Meanwhile, the French and British allies adopted a course of action known as the Deal Plan under Supreme Commander Maurice Gamelin. During the First World War, much of the fighting had occurred in the economically vital regions of northern France, and the French were determined this would not happen again. As a result, they had heavily fortified their western border with Germany, known as the Maginot Line. It was intended that this would force the Germans to go through Belgium, much as they had done in the last war. Thus, the best French forces, the 1st, 7th, and 9th Armies, as well as the entire British Expeditionary Force, would rush into Belgium and link up with the not insignificant Belgian army to block the German advance. The war would be kept outside of France, and eventually, Anglo-French material advantage over Germany would become overwhelming. When the Mechlin incident happened, it only made this plan seem more logical. Inadvertently, this played right into the revised German plan of attack, as the most modern Allied armies would rush right into the trap and be unable to respond to the main German blow when it came. Conflict broke out on May 10th, with mass German invasions of the Low Countries, much like French plans had originally predicted. 18th Army attacked the Netherlands, while 6th Army invaded Belgium, and there were large-scale air attacks and paratrooper drops to seize key junctions. The Allied plan was for Belgian forces to waylay the Germans as British and French soldiers arrived in strength. However, Belgian resistance was rapidly unhinged. Paratrooper and airborne soldiers captured vital bridges and neutralized the massive, modern fortress at Eben Amiel, opening the way for armored spearheads of Erich Hoppner's 16th Motorized Corps to cross the Meuse and thrust deep ahead into Belgian territory. As a result of all of this, it soon became clear to Allied commanders that simply linking up with the Belgian army and setting up a solid defensive line along the Dyle, as the plan had called for, would be no easy feat. René Priault's cavalry corps, an elite, mobile French formation, was dispatched to hold the Germans off until French and British infantry could establish themselves in a coherent defensive line. Priault's men moved ahead to confront the Germans, and contact was first made by Panhard armored cars performing a deep reconnaissance, who knocked out at least one German tank. In anticipation of the coming clash, Priault made a stand near the town of Hannut, with 3rd DLM to the north and 2nd DLM to the south, taking up a defensive position amidst the fields and villages. His objective was not complete victory, but to trade space for time and hold off the German armor until French and British infantry could move up and get into position. The opposing French and German forces were actually relatively evenly matched in terms of both numbers and composition. Erich Hoppner's force was composed of 2 panzer divisions, the 3rd and the 4th, though the 3rd had not yet arrived, and thus 4th Panzer would have to lead the charge. Overall, they had 25,000 men and over 600 tanks, but most were the lightly armed and armored Panzer Is and IIs, and only 125 were the modern Panzer IIIs and IVs with real anti-tank capability. René Priault's cavalry corps was composed of 2 DLM, Division Léger Mécanique, or mechanized light divisions. They were equipped with modern SOMUA S-35 medium tanks, which outgunned and out-armored anything the Germans had, and were practically invulnerable to all but the heaviest German weapons. However, due to the paucity of S-35s, French ranks were filled out by the smaller Hotchkiss models. Altogether, Priault had around 20,000 men and over 400 tanks, as well as lighter reconnaissance vehicles and armored cars. Generally speaking, French tanks tended to be better armed and armored, but were handicapped by small turrets, leaving the commander overworked, and lack of radios, making communication and coordination difficult, while modern German tanks had 3-man turrets and radios. 4th Panzer began its attack on the morning of May 12th, and French screening forces withdrew from Hannut itself. German armor, composed mostly of light panzers, moved forward, and soon encountered a squadron of French Hotchkiss tanks. In the ensuing fight, the Germans were horrified to see their 20mm autocannon rounds simply bounce off the French armor, and several German tanks were themselves destroyed or damaged. A company commander, Ernst Jungenfield, reported, "Enemy tanks popped up at every corner. The situation grew hot, and on occasion, the enemy grew so strong that he took the offensive. It wasn't until better armed Panzer IIIs were brought up that the French could be cleared out, losing 9 tanks to 5 German. The Germans then pressed on to Thens, but encountered stiff resistance from French defenders who had barricaded the streets. Around the same time, a group of heavily armored French S-35 tanks counterattacked towards Kriehen, losing 4 of their number, but disrupting the German advance, and French soldiers slipped away from Thens. As night fell, both sides broke off the engagement. The French had largely gotten the better of the first day's fighting. One German officer remarked that the fighting had been hard and bloody, and that many a brave panzer man had to lay down his life for the fatherland. On the next day, 3rd Panzer Division arrived, and the Germans were ready to resume their attack in earnest, making a concerted effort against one sector of the French line to break through. The 2 Panzer divisions would focus their effort on the 3rd DLM, largely ignoring the 2nd DLM to the south. The French were not inactive, and in order to take pressure off the 3rd DLM, French tanks from 2nd DLM raided north, but suffered losses from heavy 88mm anti-tank guns the Germans had brought up, and their attack stalled. To the north, elements of 3rd Panzer Division crossed the Petite Gette stream, driving on the villages of Marise and Orp, but French resistance was strong, and many German vehicles were destroyed in the process. Fierce tank battles erupted, and eventually, German numerical superiority began to tell, forcing the French back. Meanwhile, after a Stuka attack, the 4th Panzer swung around to the south, its infantry advancing on the villages west of Hannut, with the Panzer regiments pushing to Mordorp. French defenders took the Panzers under heavy fire, and recognizing their inability to deal with French armor in head-to-head tank duels, the Germans brought up more 88mm guns. After further attacks, the French were driven from Mordorp. The German advance continued on to Gendronwy, which the French also fell back from. At Gendron, the advance of both Panzer divisions intersected. From the north, tanks of 3rd Panzer attacked. French Lieutenant Robert Lebel, manning his Hotchkiss tank, recorded, about 3 kilometers away, a Panzer division shaping itself for battle. The massive gathering of this armored armada was an unforgettable sight. Lebel personally hit 6 German tanks, but the French were running low on ammunition. To the south, the advancing panzers were taken under heavy French artillery fire directed from a water tower, and Jungenfield, a German commander, called the situation devilishly difficult. Fighting was ferocious, and Jungenfield's tank itself was knocked out by an S-35. But in the process of being encircled, the French defenders at Gendron finally fell back. The intensity of the fighting can be shown by the state of Lieutenant Lebel's Hotchkiss tank, which sustained 15 anti-tank rounds and 42 machine gun hits. Indeed, in one curious incident, a German tank commander was so frustrated with the inability of his gun to penetrate French armor, he actually jumped out with a hammer to smash the periscope, but was run over and killed. With the line in a critical state, 3rd DLM began withdrawing by the evening of the 13th, while 2nd DLM remained in position for the night before starting its retreat. It has been a continual debate over who won the first great tank battle of World War II. The French lost slightly more than 100 tanks, while German losses were likely near 160 damaged, but as they possessed the battlefield, the Germans could recover and repair many damaged vehicles, and thus only around 50 were completely destroyed. From a tactical perspective, Hannut was a French victory, as Priot's corps had succeeded in its goal of screening the German offensive until infantry could move up and set up a defensive position. With their mission completed, the DLMs fell back. As Robert Forczyk said in his book, Case Red, The Collapse of France, French tankers did far better on their first encounter with Panzer Division N than Soviet tankers would do at Minsk in 1941, or British tankers at Gazala in 1942, or American tankers at Kasserine Pass in 1943. The DLMs inflicted equivalent damage on the enemy and survived to fight another day. When the panzers continued their attack, the anti-tank obstacle erected by the Belgians proved a disappointment, but at Gembloux, they were confronted by strong infantry and artillery defenses, and failed to make headway, suffering heavy losses. The Germans were even successfully counterattacked by Moroccan colonial infantry with tank support, and pushed back. However, from an operational perspective, it was a German success, as despite the indecisive nature of the battle itself, Hoppner's Corps and Army Group B as a whole accomplished their objective. Allied attention was fixed in Belgium, and their best units were tied down, unable to quickly respond elsewhere. Meanwhile, to the south, the decisive battle of the campaign was already unfolding, as the main German thrust rapidly moved against unprepared French defenders near Sedan.